Most people believe resilience is built through suffering, that every setback makes you stronger. Every betrayal teaches a lesson. Every failure builds character. But what if that's only half the story? Because if suffering alone created strength, the most broken people would also be the most unshakable. Yet reality tells us something different. Some people endure years of hardship and become bitter, anxious, and emotionally fragile. Others face the same storms and emerge with an almost unsettling calm. They cannot be manipulated by praise, shaken by criticism, or controlled by fear. The difference isn't what happened to them, it's how they learn to see power. Machiavelli understood something most people still struggle to accept. The greatest threats rarely come from open enemies. They come from hidden expectations, emotional dependence, and the quiet need for approval. Long before someone attacks your position, they discover what controls your emotions. And once they know that, they no longer need force. They only need leverage. So the question isn't whether life will try to break you. The question is this: what part of you can still be used against you? We live in a world that rewards appearances but quietly exploits emotional weakness. At work, promotions are often influenced by perception as much as performance. On social media, confidence is measured through carefully curated images. In relationships, attention has become a currency. Everywhere you look, people are competing, not only for success but for status, influence, and emotional certainty. Modern psychology explains why. Human beings evolved to seek belonging because exclusion once threatened survival. Our brains still react to rejection as if it were physical danger. A harsh comment can linger for days. Silence from someone we value feels like a verdict. Public embarrassment activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid these feelings. Machiavelli approached them differently. He recognized that the person who governs their own emotions becomes difficult to govern by anyone else. The Stoics reached a similar conclusion from another direction. Freedom begins the moment external events stop dictating your inner world. But here's what most people never notice. True resilience isn't emotional numbness. It's strategic clarity. As we explore these 10 ruthless principles, you'll begin recognizing invisible patterns hiding beneath everyday conversations, office politics, friendships, and even your own decisions. You'll start seeing that what appears to be confidence is often insecurity, and what appears to be power is sometimes nothing more than disciplined self-control. Because the strongest people rarely look the strongest. 1. The approval trap. The first chain most people never notice isn't fear, it's approval. From childhood, we're conditioned to seek validation. Good grades earn praise. Obedience earns affection. Achievement earns recognition. Over time, approval becomes less of a reward and more of a psychological necessity. We begin shaping our decisions around how they'll be perceived instead of whether they're truly right. At first, this seems harmless. After all, cooperation helps societies function. But there's another layer. The moment someone realizes your self-worth depends on their opinion, they gain silent influence over your behavior. They don't have to threaten you. They only need to withdraw approval. Behavioral psychology calls this intermittent reinforcement. When praise becomes unpredictable, people work even harder to earn it. It's the same mechanism that keeps gamblers pulling slot machines and social media users checking notifications. Uncertainty intensifies attachment. Machiavelli understood that dependence creates vulnerability. Whether in politics or personal relationships, the individual who constantly seeks reassurance gradually surrenders autonomy. They begin negotiating against themselves before anyone else even speaks. Imagine a workplace where one manager rarely compliments employees. Every small acknowledgement suddenly feels valuable. One employee starts volunteering for extra projects, staying late, avoiding disagreement. Not because it's required, but because they're chasing recognition. Their performance is no longer driven by purpose. It's driven by emotional dependence. The irony is that genuine confidence often appears less eager. People instinctively assign higher status to those who don't seem desperate for acceptance. Social psychology calls this the scarcity principle. What appears less available often appears more valuable. The practical lesson is deceptively simple. Before making an important decision, pause and ask yourself one question. Would I still choose this if nobody applauded me? If the answer changes, approval, not conviction, is leading your life. And once approval loses its grip, another invisible force begins revealing itself. Not what people think of you, but what your behavior quietly communicates about your status. 2. Silent power. Power rarely announces itself. It rarely raises its voice, and it almost never needs to prove that it exists. Most people assume confidence is something you display through constant speaking, constant explaining, or constant defending. Yet research in social perception repeatedly shows that excessive justification often signals insecurity rather than certainty. The more urgently someone argues for their value, the more observers unconsciously question it. This is where Machiavelli becomes surprisingly relevant. He recognized that authority depends as much on perception as on reality. A ruler who reacts emotionally to every criticism teaches others exactly how to provoke him. A leader who remains composed forces people to reconsider their assumptions. Silence, when chosen deliberately, becomes information. Not because silence is always wise, but because people instinctively fill empty spaces with their own interpretations. In negotiations, the first person to become uncomfortable often reveals more than intended. In disagreements, the individual who stays emotionally steady frequently appears stronger, even before a solution is reached. Consider a meeting where an idea is criticized. One employee immediately rushes to defend every detail, interrupting, over-explaining, trying to convince everyone they're right. Another simply listens. They ask one thoughtful question. They acknowledge useful criticism without appearing threatened. By the end of the discussion, the room often trusts the second person more. Not necessarily because their idea was better, but because their composure suggested confidence. Here's the psychological twist. Humans are deeply influenced by emotional contagion. We unconsciously mirror the emotional state of those around us. Panic spreads. Calm spreads too. The person who regulates their emotions quietly regulates the atmosphere. This is why Stoic philosophy emphasized mastery over reaction. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that events are rarely as damaging as our judgments about them. Emotional discipline isn't suppression. It's refusing to surrender control of your mind to every external stimulus. The practical takeaway is simple. The next time someone provokes you, resist the urge to answer immediately. Let the silence exist for a moment. Observe rather than react. Very often, that brief pause communicates more strength than the perfect argument ever could. But that's only half the story. Because even silence can become another performance if your identity still depends on how others see you. And that illusion runs far deeper than most people ever realize. 3. The invisible prison of reputation. Most people believe their reputation is something they own. In reality, it often becomes something that owns them. At first, this seems like the price of success. You work hard, earn respect, build trust, and become known for being reliable, intelligent, or kind. But over time, a subtle shift occurs. Instead of acting according to your principles, you begin acting according to the image you've created. The real problem isn't reputation itself, it's attachment to it. Modern psychology calls this identity maintenance. Once people adopt a social identity, they instinctively defend it, even when it no longer serves them. They fear looking inconsistent more than they fear making the wrong decision. Machiavelli understood that perception shapes influence, but he also understood that the wisest leaders never become prisoners of their own image. They adapt when circumstances demand it. Rigidity is comforting, but flexibility survives. Think about someone who has always been seen as the nice person in the office. They avoid difficult conversations, hesitate to set boundaries, and quietly accept unfair workloads because they're afraid of disappointing others. Ironically, the reputation that once earned admiration now attracts exploitation. Here's the unexpected insight. The strongest identity is one that doesn't need constant protection. Stoic philosophy reminds us that character exists independently of applause. If your values are genuine, they don't disappear because someone misunderstands you. The practical lesson is simple. Protect your principles more fiercely than your image. Some people will misread your intentions. Let them. Clarity of character matters far more than universal approval. But once you stop protecting your reputation at all costs, another truth becomes impossible to ignore. People aren't only responding to who you are. They're responding to the emotional leverage they believe they have over you. Up to this point, it may sound as though power is about controlling other people. It isn't. That's the illusion. The deepest form of power has never been the ability to dominate someone else. It's the ability to remain psychologically independent when everyone around you is competing for influence. The person who cannot be emotionally purchased cannot be emotionally controlled, and that changes everything. 4. The discipline of strategic distance. One of the greatest misconceptions about strength is that it requires constant presence, always available, always responding, always explaining. Yet human behavior reveals something different. Familiarity creates comfort, but excessive availability often reduces perceived value. When people know they can access your time, attention, and emotional energy without limits, they unconsciously begin treating those resources as ordinary. This isn't cruelty, it's psychology. Scarcity influences perception in ways most people never notice. We naturally assign greater importance to what appears selective rather than endlessly accessible. Machiavelli recognized that leaders who reacted to every rumor or every criticism slowly surrendered control of their own agenda. Their opponents dictated their attention. Their emotions became predictable. Imagine receiving an inflammatory message late at night. One response is immediate outrage. The other is deliberate restraint. You sleep on it, revisit it with a clear mind, and answer only if a response genuinely serves your purpose. Externally, both people faced the same situation. Internally, only one remained free. The Stoics argued that between an event and your response lies the only territory that truly belongs to you. That space is where resilience is built. Your practical takeaway is this: not every invitation deserves acceptance. Not every criticism deserves defense. Not every conflict deserves participation. Choose your attention as carefully as you choose your closest allies, because the battles you refuse often determine the victories that matter. And that leads to the final principle, the one beneath every other lesson. 5. The unbreakable identity. Everything we've explored points toward a single realization: approval, status, reputation, silence, distance. None of these are sources of strength on their own. They are expressions of something deeper: identity. Most people build themselves from the outside in. They define who they are through achievements, relationships, titles, possessions, or public recognition. As long as those things remain, they feel secure. But life has a habit of removing exactly what we thought would last. Careers change. Relationships end. Fortunes disappear. Opinions shift overnight. If your identity depends on external stability, then every unexpected change feels like the collapse of the self. This is where Machiavelli and Stoicism quietly intersect. Machiavelli teaches strategic awareness of the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. The Stoics teach unwavering governance of the inner world, regardless of external events. Together they reveal an uncomfortable truth. The world may influence your circumstances. It does not have to define your mind. Picture two entrepreneurs whose businesses fail. One interprets failure as proof of personal inadequacy and never fully recovers. The other sees failure as information, adjusts strategy, and begins again. The event was identical. The meaning was not. Behavioral science consistently shows that interpretation shapes resilience more than circumstances themselves. What breaks people is often not the event, but the identity attached to it. The practical lesson is the simplest and perhaps the hardest. Build your identity around your principles, not your possessions. Around your discipline, not your comfort. Around your choices, not other people's opinions. Because once your identity no longer depends on what the world can give you, the world has remarkably little it can take away. There is a hidden thread connecting every principle in this discussion. It isn't manipulation. It isn't dominance, and it certainly isn't becoming cold or indifferent. It's reducing the number of places where the world can reach inside your mind. Every emotional dependency becomes a possible point of control. Every desperate need for approval becomes leverage. Every unexamined fear becomes an invitation for someone or something to dictate your decisions. Machiavelli observed these patterns in politics. The Stoics observed them within the individual. Modern psychology continues to observe them in laboratories, boardrooms, families, and relationships. Different eras, the same human nature. Real resilience is not the absence of emotion. It is the refusal to let emotion become your master. When that shift occurs, setbacks become teachers instead of verdicts. Criticism becomes information instead of identity. Success becomes something to appreciate rather than something to cling to. That is the moment a person becomes genuinely difficult to break. Strength rarely arrives with noise. It grows quietly, hidden inside ordinary choices that almost nobody notices. The decision not to chase approval. The discipline to pause before reacting. The courage to protect your principles, even when your reputation suffers. These moments appear insignificant, yet over years, they reshape a person's character more profoundly than any single victory ever could. Perhaps the greatest lesson Machiavelli leaves us is not that the world is ruthless. It is that the person who understands both the world and themselves no longer fears its unpredictability. Because the strongest fortress is never built from stone. It is built from a mind that cannot be persuaded to betray itself. If this video changed the way you see resilience, I'd like to hear your perspective. Which principle challenged your thinking the most, and where have you seen it play out in real life? Share your thoughts in the comments. Conversations about psychology, strategy, and human nature become far more valuable when different perspectives meet. And if you're interested in continuing this exploration of Machiavelli, Stoicism, influence, and the hidden dynamics that shape everyday life, consider subscribing. Because once you begin noticing these invisible patterns, they're impossible to ignore. In the next discussion, we'll explore why the people who appear to hold the least power are often the ones quietly shaping everyone else's decisions.